No one remembers the girl standing in the back until fate decides to place her in the center of the room. The Moonfall selection ceremony happened only once every 5 years, and by sunset, every road leading to Silvercrest City was crowded with carriages, riders, and hopeful families. Lanterns glowed above the stone streets, casting warm gold across the kingdom's capital, while music drifted from the grand hall at the center of the city. Olivia Hart stood near the entrance with her hands folded in front of her simple silver dress, trying not to attract attention. That part came naturally. Most of her life had been spent blending into the background. At 23, she was an Omega with no powerful family name, no remarkable social standing, and no expectation of being chosen. Around her, other young women arrived in elegant gowns decorated with gemstones and embroidered moon symbols. Their families surrounded them with praise and encouragement. Olivia had arrived alone. She preferred it that way. It hurt less when no one watched disappointment unfold. The massive doors of Moonstone Hall opened, revealing polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and banners bearing the royal crest of the Northern Territories. The scent of cedar, fresh flowers, and candle wax filled the air. Conversations echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling as nobles, pack leaders, and influential families took their places. Tonight was more than a celebration. It was an opportunity. Rumors had spread for months that Ethan Blackwood, younger brother of the Alpha King himself, intended to choose a future mate from among the eligible women attending the ceremony. The possibility had drawn ambitious families from every corner of the kingdom. Olivia had no such ambitions. In truth, she almost hadn't come. Her invitation had arrived only because every eligible Omega was required to attend. She knew exactly how people saw her. Quiet, forgettable, ordinary. Yet despite every reason to stay home, something inside her had urged her to come. She couldn't explain it. Perhaps it was hope. Perhaps it was curiosity. Or perhaps it was simply the desire to prove to herself that she no longer feared standing in rooms where she didn't belong. She moved toward the side of the hall, where fewer people gathered. A group of noblewomen nearby lowered their voices as she passed. Their smiles remained polite, but their eyes said enough. Olivia pretended not to notice. Years of experience had taught her how. She focused instead on the music floating through the room. A violinist played near the eastern balcony, while servers carried silver trays filled with sparkling drinks. Everything looked beautiful. Everything felt distant. Across the hall, cheers suddenly erupted. Heads turned toward the grand staircase. Ethan Blackwood had arrived. Tall, confident, and dressed in a midnight black formal coat, he descended the stairs while dozens of guests watched with admiration. Several young women immediately straightened their posture. Mothers exchanged hopeful glances. Fathers smiled. Olivia simply looked away. None of this had anything to do with her. She wandered toward a large window overlooking the city lights. Beyond the glass, the mountains formed dark silhouettes beneath a rising moon. The sight calmed her. For a moment, she forgot about the crowd, forgot about expectations, forgot about belonging. Then she heard laughter behind her. Not cruel laughter. Not yet. But the kind that made her shoulders tense instinctively. She recognized the sound of people searching for someone to talk about. She inhaled slowly and reminded herself that the evening would eventually end. Soon enough, everyone would return home. She would return to her small cottage near the river. Life would continue exactly as it always had. At least, that was what she believed. Because while Olivia Hart stood alone beneath the moonlit window, unaware of the eyes occasionally finding her across the crowded hall, she had no idea that before the night was over, the entire kingdom would know her name. The moment Ethan Blackwood stepped onto the center platform, the atmosphere inside Moonstone Hall changed. Conversations faded into whispers. Every eye followed him as he offered polite greetings to nobles, pack leaders, and honored guests. Olivia remained near the window, hoping the attention focused on him would allow her to disappear even further into the background. For a while, it worked. She watched the moon climb higher above the mountains while the ceremony progressed according to tradition. Names were announced. Families were recognized. Guests applauded. Then everything changed. Olivia Hart. The sound of her name echoed through the hall. She froze. At first she thought she had misheard. No one ever called her name at events like this. Yet dozens of faces suddenly turned toward her. A court attendant stood near the platform holding a scroll. "Olivia Hart, please come forward." Heat rushed to her cheeks. Her heart began to pound. Around her, curious expressions appeared. Some people exchanged surprised looks. Others smiled as though expecting entertainment. Olivia swallowed and slowly stepped away from the window. The walk felt far longer than it should have. Each footstep echoed against the marble floor. She could feel hundreds of eyes following her. When she finally reached the center of the room, she stopped several feet from Ethan Blackwood and lowered her gaze respectfully. "You called for me?" she asked softly. Ethan studied her for a moment. His expression was pleasant enough, but something about his smile felt rehearsed. Around him stood several young women from powerful families, all dressed in elegant gowns. Olivia immediately understood what was happening. Somehow, she had become part of a comparison she never wanted to join. "I did," Ethan said. "Tonight celebrates possibilities. I thought it would be interesting to acknowledge every candidate." A few people chuckled. Olivia felt her stomach tighten. She was not a candidate. Everyone in the room knew it. Yet no one said a word. Ethan slowly turned toward the crowd. "Miss Hart has attended every public gathering for years," he continued. "A model of persistence." More laughter followed. Not loud. Not cruel enough to draw criticism. Just enough to sting. Olivia forced herself to remain calm. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan tilted his head. "Tell me, Olivia, did you truly believe tonight might change your future?" The question sounded harmless. The reaction around the room revealed otherwise. Several guests smiled knowingly. Others leaned closer, eager to hear her answer. Olivia searched for the safest response. "I came because I received an invitation." A few people laughed again. Ethan smiled wider. "A practical answer." One of the noble women beside him spoke next. "That is probably for the best." More laughter spread through the hall. Olivia felt every word like cold rain. She knew none of them personally, yet somehow they had already decided who belonged and who did not. Ethan raised a hand for silence. "In any case," he announced, "I think everyone here understands that certain matches make sense and others do not." The statement hung in the air. Then he turned toward a tall blonde woman standing nearby. The crowd immediately understood. Applause erupted as he invited her onto the platform beside him. Olivia stepped back instinctively. She wanted to leave. She wanted the floor to open beneath her and spare her the embarrassment of remaining there. Yet her legs refused to move. The applause continued. The chosen woman beamed proudly. Ethan accepted congratulations from nearby nobles. Around the room, whispers began spreading like wine through dry leaves. Olivia heard fragments. "Poor girl. She never had a chance. Why was she even called up there? Someone should have warned her." She lowered her eyes and started toward the edge of the hall. No one noticed the sadness she tried to hide behind her composed expression. No one except a pair of silver eyes watching silently from the upper balcony, eyes that had followed every moment from the beginning and had not looked away once. Olivia kept her eyes on the marble floor as she moved away from the center platform. The applause behind her continued for several seconds before gradually fading back into ordinary conversation. Within moments, the ceremony carried on as though nothing unusual had happened, as though she had not been summoned in front of hundreds of guests only to become the subject of a carefully disguised joke. She told herself it did not matter. She had survived worse embarrassments. Yet the tightness in her chest refused to ease. She reached a quieter corner near one of the stone columns and took a slow breath. The music still played. Crystal chandeliers still sparkled overhead. Laughter still drifted through the hall. Somehow that made everything feel worse. The world continued turning while her pride struggled to recover. A server passed nearby carrying a tray of refreshments. Olivia accepted a glass of sparkling cider, mostly to give her hands something to do. She stared at the golden bubbles rising through the glass and focused on breathing steadily. Across the room, Ethan remained surrounded by admirers. His chosen companion stood proudly at his side while guests offered congratulations. Every smile directed toward them felt like another reminder that Olivia did not belong among people like them. She was preparing to slip quietly toward the exit when a voice stopped her. "Leaving already?" Olivia turned. 3 young noblewomen approached, their expensive gowns shimmering beneath the chandelier light. The one in front wore emerald green silk and a smile that seemed pleasant until one looked closely. "I thought you might want to stay," the woman continued. "After all, not everyone receives personal attention from a Blackwood." The others laughed softly. Olivia recognized the tone immediately. It was the kind of cruelty designed to remain socially acceptable. I am fine, Olivia answered politely. Thank you. Are you? Another woman asked. You looked surprised up there. Olivia forced a small smile. I think everyone was surprised. The group exchanged amused glances. That is true, said the first woman. Most of us thought Ethan would only invite serious candidates forward. Olivia lowered her gaze. She knew responding would only encourage them. Unfortunately, silence seemed to encourage them too. Perhaps the invitation list was longer than expected this year, another remarked. Mistakes happen. More laughter followed. Olivia tightened her grip around the glass. She wanted to walk away, yet doing so felt like surrender. Before she could decide, someone brushed past her shoulder. The movement was small, accidental, perhaps, yet the impact was enough to jostle her hand. The glass slipped. Sparkling cider splashed across the front of her silver dress. A few nearby guests turned at the sound. The noblewomen immediately covered their mouths. Oh dear, one said, making no effort to hide her amusement. How unfortunate. Olivia looked down at the spreading stain. It was not ruined. It could be cleaned. Still, embarrassment washed over her. Several people had noticed. Whispers began again. I am sorry, she murmured, though she had done nothing wrong. Of course you are, the woman replied. You always seem to be. Olivia opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was no point arguing. She carefully placed the empty glass onto a nearby table and stepped away from the group. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. She needed fresh air. She needed distance. She needed one quiet place where nobody expected her to prove her worth. As she crossed the hall, her hand brushed against the small silver necklace resting beneath her dress. Instinctively, she pulled it free. Moonlight from the nearby windows caught the delicate pendant hanging from the chain. It had belonged to her mother, the only piece of family history she still carried. The sight of it brought a brief moment of comfort. Then someone collided with her from behind. The impact was sudden. The chain snapped. Olivia felt the pendant slip from her fingers. She heard a tiny metallic sound against the marble floor. And when she looked down, her mother's necklace lay broken at her feet. For a moment, the noise of Moonstone Hall seemed to disappear. Olivia stared at the broken necklace lying on the marble floor as though the rest of the world had drifted out of focus. The delicate silver chain had snapped cleanly in two. The small moon-shaped pendant rested a few inches away, catching the glow of the chandeliers above. Her mother had given it to her years ago. It was the last gift she had ever received from her. The last piece of home she carried with her wherever she went. Slowly, Olivia knelt and reached for it. Around her, conversations continued. Music floated through the hall. Guests laughed and celebrated. Yet none of it felt real. She carefully gathered the broken pieces into her palm and closed her fingers around them. A lump formed in her throat. Not because of the necklace itself. Not entirely. It was everything. The ceremony. The humiliation. The whispers. The feeling that no matter how hard she tried to remain invisible, she somehow became a target anyway. You should have watched where you were going. The voice came from behind her. Olivia looked up. One of the noble women stood nearby, offering a smile that carried no warmth. Accidents happen, the woman added. Especially when someone is distracted. Olivia rose slowly. I suppose they do. The woman appeared disappointed by the lack of reaction. Without another word, she turned and rejoined her companions. Olivia remained still for a few seconds before slipping the broken necklace into a small pocket hidden inside her dress. She needed air. She needed distance from all of this. She began moving toward a quieter section of the hall near the western balcony. Above the crowd, banners bearing the royal crest hung between towering stone columns. Beyond them, a second level overlooked the ceremony below. Most guests rarely looked upward. Olivia certainly did not. If she had, she might have noticed the man standing there. Alexander Blackwood stood in the shadows of the upper gallery, one hand resting against the carved stone railing. His expression remained calm, unreadable to anyone watching. Yet his silver eyes followed Olivia's movements with quiet attention. He had watched her from the beginning of the evening. He had seen her standing alone by the window. He had heard every carefully disguised insult. He had witnessed Ethan calling her forward for amusement. And now he had seen the necklace break. Beside him stood a royal advisor. Your Majesty, the advisor said carefully, the ambassadors from East Ridge have arrived. Alexander did not immediately answer. His gaze remained fixed below. I will greet them shortly. The advisor hesitated. Is something concerning you? Alexander finally looked away from the hall. That depends. On what? Whether what I witnessed tonight was carelessness or intention. The advisor glanced toward the crowd below, but could not determine what had drawn the king's attention. Alexander said nothing further. He rarely explained his thoughts. Down on the main floor, Olivia reached the balcony doors and stepped outside. Cool night air greeted her immediately. The city stretched before her in a sea of lantern lights and distant rooftops. Mountains surrounded Silver Crest City like silent guardians beneath the moonlit sky. She inhaled deeply. The tension in her chest eased slightly. Out here, away from the noise, she could think. She rested her hands against the stone railing and closed her eyes for a moment. You look like someone carrying more weight than a necklace should hold. Olivia opened her eyes. An elderly man stood a few feet away near the balcony entrance. His gray hair was neatly combed. His formal servant's uniform marked him as one of the palace attendants. Yet there was something kind about his expression. I am sorry, Olivia said. I did not realize anyone else was out here. Most people are too busy watching themselves tonight. His smile softened. Sometimes that leaves the quieter souls unnoticed. Olivia found herself returning a faint smile. That sounds familiar. The old servant chuckled. Then perhaps you understand something many others do not. Before she could ask what he meant, music suddenly swelled from inside the hall. The next stage of the ceremony was beginning. Guests started moving toward the grand ballroom. The servant glanced toward the doors. I should return. He paused. Do not let tonight convince you that your worth depends on someone else's opinion, Miss Hart. Olivia blinked in surprise. How do you know my name? But the old man only smiled and offered a small bow. Then he disappeared back into the hall, leaving Olivia alone beneath the moonlight, completely unaware that the humble servant she had just spoken with was one of the most trusted men in the entire kingdom, and that someone far more powerful had already begun paying very close attention to her. Olivia remained on the balcony for another minute after the elderly servant disappeared. His words lingered in her mind long after the doors closed behind him. Do not let tonight convince you that your worth depends on someone else's opinion. It sounded simple, yet it touched something deep inside her. For years she had measured herself against the expectations of others and somehow always come up short. Slowly she released a breath and slipped her hand into her pocket. Her fingers found the broken pieces of her mother's necklace. The damage was real, but it could be repaired. Perhaps that mattered more than she realized. Gathering her composure, she stepped back into Moonstone Hall. The celebration had shifted into its next phase. Guests moved between the ballroom and banquet area, while musicians filled the air with lively melodies. Servers carried silver trays through the crowd. Laughter echoed beneath the towering ceilings. For the first time all evening, Olivia felt less concerned about where she belonged. She simply wanted the night to end peacefully. She had barely crossed half the hall when a sudden commotion near the banquet tables caught her attention. A tray crashed onto the floor. Several glasses shattered. A startled gasp swept through nearby guests. Olivia turned instinctively. An older servant had stumbled near the edge of the room. The man swayed unsteadily before collapsing into a chair. The tray he had been carrying lay scattered across the polished marble. Around him, people stepped aside. Some looked uncomfortable. Others pretended not to notice. A few guests frowned in annoyance at the interruption. Someone should handle that, one nobleman remarked without moving. Where is the staff supervisor? Asked another. The elderly servant's face had gone pale. One hand pressed against his chest while his breathing became shallow and uneven. Olivia did not hesitate. She moved through the crowd immediately. Sir, she asked gently as she knelt beside him. Can you hear me? The man's eyes opened slightly. He looked disoriented. I am fine, he whispered. Just dizzy. You are not fine. Olivia offered a reassuring smile. Please stay seated. She looked around the room. Can someone bring water? Several guests stared. No one responded. Olivia stood and retrieved a nearby glass herself. Returning to the servant's side, she helped him take a few small sips. The color slowly began returning to his face. Thank you, he murmured. You should not be working tonight if you are feeling unwell, Olivia said. Has this happened before? The man hesitated. Sometimes. Olivia frowned slightly. Then someone should know. Nearby, a few noblewomen exchanged amused looks. One whispered that it was typical for Olivia to spend more time with servants than with important guests. Another quietly laughed. Olivia ignored them completely. The elderly man before her mattered more than their opinions. She adjusted the chair so he could sit more comfortably. "Better?" she asked. He nodded. "Much better." Unseen by most of the room, another figure had stopped watching the ceremony entirely. From the upper level, Alexander Blackwood observed every second of the interaction. Beside him stood the same advisor from earlier. "Interesting," the advisor murmured. Alexander said nothing. His silver eyes remained fixed below. The servant Olivia had rushed to help was not an ordinary palace employee. His name was Samuel Whitmore. For nearly 30 years he had served as the king's closest steward, advisor, and trusted confidant. Many nobles sought his favor. Most ignored him when no advantage could be gained. Tonight, after witnessing Olivia's humiliation, not one member of the aristocracy had stepped forward when Samuel needed assistance. Not one except her. Down below, Samuel smiled warmly. "You remind me of someone." Olivia tilted her head. "Who?" "Someone who believed kindness was valuable even when nobody was watching." Before she could answer, another voice interrupted. "There you are." Olivia looked up. Ethan Blackwood approached with several companions beside him. The conversation around them began to quiet. Samuel's expression changed almost imperceptibly. And somewhere above, Alexander's gaze sharpened as his younger brother stopped directly in front of Olivia. The room seemed to grow quieter as Ethan Blackwood stopped in front of Olivia. His smile was polished and confident, the kind that impressed crowds and appeared charming from a distance. Up close, however, Olivia could not ignore the uncomfortable feeling settling in her chest. Samuel remained seated beside her, recovering, while several nearby guests turned their attention toward the unexpected gathering. Ethan glanced briefly at the elderly steward before returning his gaze to Olivia. "I should have known I would find you here," he said lightly. Olivia blinked. "I am sorry. Helping people." Ethan spread his hands as though making an observation everyone should appreciate. "You certainly have a talent for appearing wherever sympathy is needed." A few of his companions laughed quietly. Olivia felt the familiar sting beneath the words. On the surface, it sounded like praise. Underneath, it carried something else entirely. "Someone needed assistance," she replied. "That is all." Ethan nodded. Of course. His chosen companion, a noblewoman named Victoria Hale, stepped forward beside him. Her diamond necklace sparkled beneath the chandeliers. "It is admirable," Victoria said. "Not everyone enjoys the celebration in the same way." Olivia could not tell whether it was meant kindly or not. Before she could answer, Samuel unexpectedly spoke. "Miss Hart did more than most people tonight." The surrounding conversation softened immediately. Samuel's voice was calm, but it carried weight. Ethan's expression barely changed. "I am pleased to hear you are feeling better, Samuel." Olivia looked from one man to the other. Ethan knew him. More importantly, he spoke to him with a level of respect she had not expected. A strange realization began forming in her mind. This elderly servant might be far more important than he appeared. Samuel offered a small nod. "Thanks to Miss Hart." Ethan smiled again. "Then perhaps she deserves recognition." Several guests nearby appeared interested. Olivia, on the other hand, wanted nothing less. Recognition had brought her nothing but embarrassment all evening. "That is not necessary," she said quickly. "Nonsense," Ethan replied. "Good deeds should be acknowledged." He looked toward the crowd. "Do you not agree?" A few people murmured their approval. Others simply watched. Olivia wished the floor would swallow her. She had spent years avoiding attention. Somehow tonight seemed determined to place her beneath a spotlight. From the upper gallery, Alexander Blackwood remained motionless. His gaze never left the scene below. Beside him, his advisor quietly observed the exchange. "Your brother enjoys an audience," the advisor remarked. Alexander did not answer immediately. "Yes," he said at last. "He does." Down below, Ethan continued. "You know, Olivia, there is something I find curious." She immediately disliked the direction of the conversation. "What is that?" "You seem completely unaffected by status." A few guests exchanged glances. Ethan folded his arms. "Most people spend an entire evening trying to impress nobles. You spend yours helping servants." Samuel's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Olivia answered honestly. "I do not think kindness should depend on someone's title." Silence followed. Brief. Unexpected. Several nearby guests shifted awkwardly. Victoria's smile faltered. Even Ethan appeared momentarily surprised. Olivia had not intended to make a statement. To her, it was simply the truth. Samuel looked at her with unmistakable approval. Above them, Alexander's expression changed for the first time all evening. Not dramatically, just enough for his advisor to notice. Interesting, the advisor asked quietly. Alexander's silver eyes remained fixed on Olivia. Very. Before either man could say more, another royal official approached the balcony. Your Majesty, he said respectfully, the council requests your presence in the royal chamber. Alexander did not move. In a moment, the official bowed and retreated. Below, the crowd slowly began dispersing. Conversations resumed. Ethan and Victoria moved away, drawn back toward the center of the celebration. Yet as Ethan walked away, he glanced over his shoulder one final time. Something unreadable flickered across his face. Olivia exhaled quietly once he was gone. She had the strange feeling she had just passed some kind of invisible test without realizing it. Samuel rose carefully from his chair. Thank you again, Miss Hart. You do not need to thank me. Perhaps not. A warm smile touched his face. But I suspect someone else soon will. Olivia frowned in confusion. Samuel merely bowed and disappeared into the crowd. And high above the ballroom, the Alpha King finally turned away from the railing, carrying with him a question he could no longer ignore. Why was the most genuine person in the room also the one everyone seemed determined to overlook? The evening should have been winding down, but for Olivia it felt as though every passing minute brought a new challenge. After Samuel disappeared into the crowd, she considered leaving the hall entirely. No one would notice. Most guests remained focused on dancing, networking, or celebrating Ethan and Victoria. Yet something stopped her. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was the memory of her mother's necklace resting broken in her pocket. She refused to let the night chase her away. Determined to remain composed, she moved toward one of the refreshment tables near the ballroom entrance. The musicians had begun playing a slower melody now, and couples drifted across the polished floor beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. For a brief moment, Olivia allowed herself to simply watch. Then she heard her name again. There she is. The voice belonged to Victoria. Olivia's shoulders tensed immediately. Ethan stood beside his chosen companion, surrounded by several young nobles who seemed eager to remain within their circle. Victoria smiled brightly as Olivia approached, though the warmth never reached her eyes. We were just discussing tonight's surprises, Victoria said. You certainly provided one. A few people laughed. Olivia offered a polite nod. I am glad everyone enjoyed themselves. One of the noblemen chuckled. That is one way to describe it. Another added, you handled the attention well. Most people would have been embarrassed. Olivia met his gaze calmly. Most people probably would not have been placed in that situation. The comment earned a few raised eyebrows. Ethan folded his arms. Surely you are not still upset. I am not upset. Olivia paused. Just tired. Victoria tilted her head. Perhaps next time you will not misunderstand your place. The words landed harder than the others. Around them, conversation softened. Several nearby guests suddenly found the exchange very interesting. Olivia felt heat rise in her cheeks. Not because she was ashamed, but because she recognized exactly what was happening. This was no longer casual teasing. Victoria wanted an audience. Ethan made no effort to stop it. My place? Olivia asked quietly. Victoria smiled. You know what I mean. Silence followed. A dangerous silence. The kind that forced everyone nearby to choose whether they would intervene or simply watch. Predictably, they watched. Olivia could have walked away. Part of her wanted to. Yet another part had grown weary of shrinking herself to make others comfortable. She straightened slightly. Actually, I do not. Victoria's smile faltered. Olivia continued before fear could stop her. I came here because I was invited. I treated people with respect because they deserved it. If that is somehow confusing, then perhaps the problem is not mine. The surrounding group fell completely silent. Ethan looked genuinely surprised. Victoria's expression hardened. You are becoming awfully confident for someone who spent the entire evening being overlooked. The comment drew a few uncomfortable laughs. Olivia felt the sting, but she refused to lower her eyes this time. Being overlooked is not the same thing as being worthless. Across the ballroom, several heads turned. The tension had become impossible to ignore. Even the musicians seemed quieter. On the upper level, Alexander Blackwood had returned to the gallery after concluding his council meeting. The moment he stepped back into view, he sensed the shift in the room. His gaze immediately found the source. Olivia stood alone facing a group determined to diminish her. Yet somehow she appeared stronger than she had all night. Beside him, the advisor followed his line of sight. "It seems your brother has created another spectacle." Alexander's expression remained unreadable. Down below, Victoria took a step forward. "Perhaps you should remember who you are speaking to." Olivia opened her mouth to answer. Before a single word could leave her lips, a deep voice echoed across the ballroom. "I think she remembers perfectly." Every conversation stopped. Every guest froze. And slowly, hundreds of eyes turned toward the grand staircase where the Alpha King himself had finally decided to step into the center of the story. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire ballroom. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the musicians lowered their instruments as Alexander Blackwood descended the grand staircase one measured step at a time. He wore no crown tonight, yet he did not need one. Authority followed him like a shadow. Every guest instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path through the center of the room. Olivia stood frozen. She had seen the Alpha King before only from a distance. Never this close. Never with those silver eyes focused directly on her. Victoria's confidence vanished first. Her smile disappeared as she quickly lowered her gaze. Ethan straightened beside her, clearly surprised by his brother's sudden appearance. Alexander stopped several feet from the group. The room remained silent. He looked at Victoria. "You were saying something about remembering one's place." Victoria swallowed. "Your Majesty, I was merely what?" Alexander asked calmly. The question was not loud. Somehow that made it more powerful. Victoria struggled for an answer. None came. Alexander's gaze shifted briefly across the surrounding nobles. Several suddenly became very interested in the floor. Then he turned toward Olivia. The contrast was impossible to miss. His expression softened, if only slightly. "Miss Hart." Olivia's heart pounded. "Your Majesty." Alexander studied her for a moment. He noticed the stains still visible on her dress. He noticed the tension she tried to hide. Most importantly, he noticed that despite everything she had endured tonight, she still stood with quiet dignity. "I understand you assisted Samuel when he needed help." Olivia glanced around. She could not see the elderly steward anywhere. Anyone would have done the same. A faint smile touched Alexander's face. "That is where you are mistaken." Several guests exchanged uneasy looks. They understood exactly what he meant. Most of them had done nothing. Alexander slowly turned toward the crowd. "Samuel Whitmore has served this kingdom for nearly 3 decades. A wave of surprise swept through the room. Many younger guests had never realized the elderly servant's true identity. Tonight he required assistance. Alexander continued. Hundreds of people were present. One person stepped forward. His gaze returned to Olivia. The ballroom grew even quieter. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Victoria looked as though she wished she could disappear. Olivia wished exactly the same thing. She had never wanted attention. Yet for the first time all evening, the attention felt different. Not cruel, not mocking, honest. Alexander took another step forward. "I have observed this entire evening." A murmur spread through the room. Ethan's face tightened. He knew immediately what that statement meant. The king had witnessed everything. Every joke, every insult, every humiliation disguised as entertainment. Alexander's eyes settled briefly on his younger brother. Some people reveal their character through power. Then he looked back at Olivia. Others reveal it through kindness. No one dared interrupt. Olivia felt as though the entire room had disappeared. There was only the king standing before her and the strange sincerity in his voice. Alexander extended his hand. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Even Ethan looked stunned. Olivia stared at the offered hand, uncertain she understood what was happening. "Miss Hart," Alexander said, his voice carrying through the hall. "You have spent this evening being underestimated." The words struck something deep inside her. "You have been overlooked by people who judged value through status rather than character." Around the room, several faces reddened. Alexander remained calm. That was their mistake. Another ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. Olivia's eyes widened. She could hardly breathe. Alexander's hand remained extended between them. Patient, certain. "If no one else recognizes your worth," he said, "then allow me to be perfectly clear." The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. You deserve far more respect than you have been shown tonight." Olivia felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. For the first time since arriving at Moonstone Hall, someone had seen her completely and chosen kindness instead of judgment. Slowly, almost trembling, she placed her hand in his. And the moment their hands touched, a stunned silence swept across every corner of the ballroom, as though the entire kingdom had just witnessed the beginning of something neither fate nor history intended to keep hidden. The instant Olivia's hand settled into Alexander's, the atmosphere inside Moonstone Hall changed completely. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was something far more powerful. The laughter that had followed her throughout the evening disappeared. The whispers vanished. Even the air itself seemed different. Olivia could feel hundreds of eyes fixed on her, yet for the first time that night, she no longer felt exposed. She felt seen. Alexander did not release her hand. Instead, he turned slowly toward the gathered nobles and pack leaders. His calm expression carried more authority than any raised voice ever could. "Character reveals itself when there is nothing to gain," he said. The words echoed across the ballroom. No one interrupted. "Tonight, I witnessed many people competing for attention, status, and approval. I also witnessed one person offer kindness without expecting anything in return." His gaze briefly found Samuel Whitmore, standing near the edge of the room. The elderly steward smiled quietly. Olivia followed the king's gaze and finally understood. Samuel had not been an ordinary servant at all. Suddenly, every piece fit together. The respect Ethan had shown him. The way guests reacted when his identity was revealed. The importance hidden beneath simple clothing. Samuel inclined his head toward her, as though confirming her realization. Alexander continued, "A kingdom is not strengthened by titles alone. It is strengthened by integrity." Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. Ethan remained silent. Victoria could not meet anyone's eyes. The Alpha King's attention settled briefly on his younger brother. There was no anger in his expression. Somehow that made the moment even more uncomfortable. "Some judgments are made too quickly," Alexander said. Ethan lowered his gaze. He understood the message. Everyone did. Olivia stood quietly beside the king, unsure what to say. She had spent years feeling invisible. Now the most powerful man in the kingdom was defending her before the entire court. The experience felt almost unreal. Then Alexander did something no one expected. He gently raised her hand and addressed the room once more. "Miss Olivia Hart has shown more grace this evening than many people twice her rank." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. She was treated unfairly, yet she responded with dignity. She was dismissed, yet she continued to show compassion. Those qualities deserve recognition. Olivia felt tears threaten to rise. She blinked them away quickly. She would not cry here. Not tonight. Alexander offered her a reassuring smile, as though somehow understanding exactly what she was feeling. "You do not need to hide in the background anymore, Miss Hart." The words struck deeper than he could possibly know. For years she had accepted being overlooked because she believed it was easier than hoping for more. Yet standing there, she realized something important. Her value had never depended on other people's opinions. It had always been there. She simply needed someone to remind her. Around the ballroom, guests began lowering their heads respectfully, one by one, row after row, not because protocol demanded it, because they finally understood what the king was saying. Respect was not something reserved only for the powerful. Ethan stepped forward at last. For the first time all evening, his confidence seemed absent. "Miss Hart," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." The room fell silent again. Olivia looked at him, surprised. Ethan exhaled slowly. "I should have treated you with greater respect." Olivia studied him for a moment before giving a small nod. "Thank you." It was simple, honest. Enough. Alexander glanced toward the musicians. "I believe the evening should end on a better note than it began." The orchestra resumed playing. Soft music drifted through the hall once more. Yet everything felt different now. Olivia looked around the ballroom where she had arrived, feeling insignificant only hours earlier. The same room, the same people, and yet an entirely different world. As Alexander escorted her toward the center of the hall, moonlight spilled through the towering windows and illuminated the polished floor beneath their feet. Somewhere inside her pocket rested the broken necklace from her mother. For the first time since it had snapped, Olivia smiled. Some things could be repaired. Some endings could become beginnings. And as the kingdom of the Northern Territories watched in stunned silence, Olivia Hart stepped forward into a future she had never imagined. While far above the city, the moon shone brighter than ever.